From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. This is the Dewey Pod Monster podcast, and it is Halloween. And that, of course, means that we are going to watch the Halloween classic, Halloween. We're not going to lead off with a bad joke about another movie. We're actually going into arguably the granddaddy of all the Halloween movies, the 1978 movie. Before we get into that, if you don't already know, my name is John. I'm your host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. And with me, as always this week, is Sean, who is also the host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. Sean, how are you doing right now?
Good. I enjoy that we've started this thing where you also introduce me as a co-host. And then, I don't know, there's like, and also the co-host. I just like to hear, I like to follow
just
along
also
with it.
the host.
Also the host. You're right.
Yeah. I don't like the term co-host for some reason. So,
well, we're co-hosts,
you got
right? You're a host, I'm a host, and we're co-hosts. But I could see co-host sometimes could mean like second fiddle, like Ed McMahon.
Yeah.
He might be a co-host. I don't really know.
Sick and Andy Richter, but that works. So,
yeah.
Same concept.
So wait a minute. We're going to talk about the 1978 Halloween?
That's right. We are not doing the Rob Zombie Halloween today.
Oh, I watched Halloween at Aunt Bethel's house, 2013. Isn't that what we were supposed to talk about?
Well, there's Halloween 2018. There's Halloween, Rob Zombie Halloween, which I believe was 2000. I want to say 2008. Could be wrong on that. But no, we're talking about the one that is beloved. But before we get into that, because with this being a special episode, this is kind of off our normal release schedule. This will probably run a little shorter than what our usual episodes do. But I do kind of have we'll call it an icebreaker to get into before we get into this movie. Let me ask you, we've become fond of using the hot dog rating scale, and we kind of play fast and loose with the rules of the hot dog ratings. They could be any number out of any things as long as hot dogs are involved. So for the sake of this question, we're going to pretend that we're on a 10 hot dog scale. Do you have any movies in your quiver that you would call a 10 hot dog out of whatever movie?
Any
Doesn't
genre?
necessarily have to be a perfect, any genre, just any movie that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a perfect film, because I think I can rate something a 10 without it being like perceived as perfect,
right?
But something you would call a 10 hot dog movie.
I have a couple. I would say I bring this up when we talk about movies that I can infinitely rewatch. I would say Shawshank Redemption for me is a 10 out of 10. I would say like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a 10 out of 10. Yeah, I have a couple that, and they're ones that for me, a 10 out of 10, if I can watch a movie like infinitely and not be bored of it after watching it the first or the second time, that is like the high watermark for me. If I can watch it like and not get tired of it, that's a 10 out of 10.
Okay, I can see that. See, for me, there's a handful of women off the top of my head. I definitely throw the Big Lebowski in there.
Yeah,
I would say the original, coincidentally the same year that this movie came out, the 1978 Dawn of the Dead movie would be in that for me. I think for me, when I think of a 10 out of 10 movie, something like the nostalgia can play a big role in that. And we've talked about nostalgia before in previous episodes and how that can kind of, for better or worse, kind of skew your judgment on a movie. But I think about a movie like Evil Dead 2, and I had so much fun with that movie as a kid, and I still can go back and be just as amused with it as an adult. So I'd have to watch it again, which, oh no, it might be just under that 10 hot dog mark, but it'd be kind of pushing it. But one of them that I would probably put in there, kind of leading into this and why I wanted to talk about this with this particular title, might be the original Halloween movie. As we said, this is our topic for the day, and we're being festive. We're dropping this on Halloween, so you can get your spooky stuff or listen to this while you have some earbuds in and take your kids trick-or-treating, whatever you want to do. You don't really want to pay attention to them.
I have to say, you're really showing your hand early. I mean, you're pretty much saying that we're going to be gushing over this movie, because I don't think anybody's seen this. I've only heard this talked about in really hushed circles before this movie.
I certainly didn't say we were going to gush over it. For all I know, that you watched the wrong Halloween movie and you watched the Rob Zombie one, and we're going to be talking about two totally different movies.
I told you I watched Halloween at Aunt Bethel's house.
Halloween?
And that too, yeah. Halloween. I'm on Halloween right now, but I watched Halloween at Aunt Bethel's house, so I didn't know we were talking about. I've never heard of this movie before. It's gonna be interesting.
No. So tell me about your experience with Halloween then. What movie did you watch? Because I'm kind of interested now.
No, I did. I'll be here all week, folks. I watched Halloween. I had to cram this one in like last second so I could watch it again for the first time in quite a while. It's been probably a couple of years since I've seen this.
That actually kind of surprises me because again, this is as much as we always had a box of like Christmas movies growing up, and my wife's got the old binder of DVDs that has a shitload of Christmas movies in them that I have to be forced to watch every December. And I don't really care about those, but this is the one that for me always kind of found its way into the VHS player, whatever format it was current at the time. It gets popped in every couple times every October. So it's interesting that you said you hadn't watched this in quite a while, because the idea of not watching Halloween around Halloween is very bizarre to me. Like, I would feel like I screwed up a whole holiday if I didn't watch this movie on Halloween.
I've got an admission for you, John. And this might break up the podcast. Halloween to me, I like this movie a lot. I like the original Halloween a lot. I like 3. Let's not get into like the ranking of all the movies, but for me, like Halloween to me has always been, there's that like triumvirate of the 80s slashers or late 70s, 80s slashers, right? We have Friday the 13th, we have Nightmare on Elm Street, and we have Halloween. And to me, the franchises kind of go in that order. Like I always get, and it's not like the way that I like them or the things that, I'm not, those aren't even ranking. But to me, when I mention them, Halloween is always the third one. And it seems to me, it's always like Halloween costumes. I think of it like Halloween costumes, right? When you see kids in Halloween costumes, especially in the 80s and 90s, you would see everybody was dressed up like Jason, right? Because the merchandising for Friday the 13th, the hockey mask, the jumpsuit or whatever, the potato sack, whatever version of, usually the mask, but whatever version of Jason, that would always be the big one. Then you'd always see a bunch of Freddies, right? You'd always see the sweater, you'd see the claw, the hat. That would be the next big thing that you'd see. And then the third one, and I always wanted to do Michael Myers. We're not going to clip that out, but I always wanted to be Michael Myers. Didn't ever want to do him, but I wanted to be Michael Myers for Halloween because it was the one that but they just never did the mask very well, and it wasn't marketed very well. So when I think of slashers, Halloween always shows up. I always think of it in my mind as the third one, like always after Friday the 13th, always after Nightmare on Elm Street, and then Halloween. Not that quantity or quality of movies ranks into that. That's just how I've always thought.
No, I think a lot of that has to do with, because I get what you're saying, and I actually did have a guy on my block every Halloween. He dressed up like Michael Myers, and he must have been one of those dudes who found it. He clearly did his own mask because it looked pretty good, and he would just stalk up and down the street all night on Halloween. It was great. He did every year. He'd be out there with a fake butcher knife and chasing kids around, because that's what you did back in the 80s, is you went outside and pretended to murder children. I'm guessing that probably doesn't fly anymore, but I don't know.
I'm going to try it this year.
See what happens.
Yeah.
If you do, I'll come by and videotape it, because I think that could be a fun thing to watch. I think if you're looking at it from that aspect, say certainly that if you just look at them as a whole, I think the Friday the 13th films are the strongest like franchise from start to finish. But I think Nightmare was marketed better, because there was a while there where Freddy was fucking everywhere. Like, I think didn't he have like a breakfast cereal?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there was a breakfast cereal. I know there's really got 800 or 877 line for the kids out there. You would call these numbers 877, or what was the other one? Like 8.
He's got
they weren't 800 numbers, 976 like numbers. That. And you would call these things, and they played pre-recorded bullshit on there, and you would pay like $20 a second to listen to it.
Right. I mean, he had a parody album where he would, I heard another podcast talk about it, but I didn't even know it existed till recently. I mean, Freddy was very, very heavily marketed, but really, like, if you look at the strength of the franchise as a whole, like, one, there's not nearly as many Nightmare on Elm Street movies. There's only like 7 of them, I believe.
Yeah, something like
8
that.
if you count the remake, which we're not going to count the remake for the purposes of this conversation. But really, there's this as a whole, those movies all had inventive things in them. They were all worth watching for that reason. But as far as like movies that were actually good, debatable. Where Halloween, like the franchise as a whole, I think it's so fucking bizarre because it is of all three of those big franchises, it is the most, you could almost say it's even more so than Texas Chainsaw, which is also off the deep end half the time as far as what story they're trying to tell. But it is the most like choose your own adventure, like pick whichever movie you want to start at because it's going to end in some bizarre fucking place. I think the reality of it is like once you got past, in my opinion, once you got past part 3, it took a long time to get to the point where these felt like coherent slasher movies and not something else that happened to have Michael Myers in it. And it's not to say that 4, 5, 6, etc. don't have their points or their merits. With the exception of the Rob Zombie ones, they all have their high watermarks, but they certainly don't. And again, even like Friday the 13th, which I would say is the strongest franchise, like movie to movie, I think they probably are the highest quality. It's not like there aren't a few clunkers in there. Yeah. So, well, the thing, but where this one differentiates is, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and the thing that kind of to mention back or hit back on your point about 1, 2, and 3, and it seemed like there was a huge gap of time between the time 3 was out and the time it could recover from 3 because it wasn't Michael Myers. It was an anthology. So it right. Felt like it took so much time for it to regain any traction that was lost because of 3. So I think that's also kind of a point to mention. They took a huge break to try and reformulate or figure out how they were going to pick this thing back up.
But I think if you're comparing those 3 franchises, and I guess maybe you can make an argument for Nightmare, but I think this one has, to me, by far the strongest first chapter out of those movies. Like just the first Friday, the first Nightmare, and the first Halloween. I think this one is far and away the strongest out of those 3. And that's where this one kind of holds that special spot. Is everything that came out after it is a debate for another podcast, which we'll get to over many, many moons. But this one stands so well on its own. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was written to be a standalone film. It wasn't written to be a part 2 or part 6 or whatever. Like none of that was intended when this was made. It was very much so meant to be basically an enclosed short story where this series of unfortunate events is told. So kind of backtracking a little bit because we've kind of, again, if you have somehow not seen Halloween, I don't know how you're into like horror movies and listen to some of the shit that we've talked about if you haven't seen this movie, but we're not going to hold back on spoiler talk on this. This movie is like 50 years old, almost 50 years old at this point. So if you haven't seen it, I can only go so far as helping you on that. But I would say don't even bother renting it. Just go buy it. It's worth it. We'll tell you that right off the bat. But basically what this movie is, Halloween is telling the story of the personification of evil who breaks out of a mental institution and comes home to terrorize the neighborhood. Is that pretty accurate?
I'd say in a nutshell. Yeah. And also just to add, I watched this on Roku for free.
I didn't even know it was on Roku for free. Okay.
Yeah, it's on a couple different services for free, but Roku was the most easily accessible that I could watch it for free.
I was sure it was somewhere, like, so I just popped the disc and did that.
Right.
So this movie gives birth to some pretty legendary characters in the realm of horror. Again, if you're not familiar with these, I'd be shocked. But of course, you have Donald Pleasence as Dr. Loomis, who he's arguably the best character in this whole franchise because he just gets more and more like unhinged as he goes along up till part 6 before he passed. But in this movie, he's just super genuine. He really sells the idea that he's just trying to stop the world from ending, essentially. And he does it we see a lot of movies, like thinking back, we talked about a movie like The Black Phone, where we had cops that were being led to a crime scene by a kid who has visions. This is a little more believable than something like that. So you get Jamie Lee Curtis, and I don't believe this was her first role, but it's pretty early in her career. And she is quite arguably the original screen queen as Laurie Strode. And she absolutely is fantastic in this movie. I mean, there's little things. She plays Where are they supposed to be? 17 in this movie, 18, something like that?
Yeah, I think they're high schoolers. I mean, they're in class. They're
definitely
probably
high school
seniors or something around there.
It does look like they try to age her down a little bit. Like she's probably a little older than 17 whenever they shot this. I didn't look it up. I don't really care that much, but she's great. And she goes on to be one of the more memorable final girls. She arguably she's the prototype of the final girl trope in horror movies. You can make a strong argument for that. And then, of course, this gives birth to the main character, which would be the Shape or Michael Myers or Evil or whatever you want to call him.
I wanted to just kind of break in real quick and say, I think Jamie Lee Curtis is, besides Neve Campbell, she's probably the most closely associated with a horror franchise like this because she has just been in so many of them. She's like a staple of this series.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in that I think she makes every single entry that she's in that much better, but there's a big gap in the middle where she's just not there at all. I mean, her character's killed off screen in part 4, so
yeah, but
they can't get her to do it.
Whenever they mention a movie where Jamie Lee Curtis is going to be in this one, it's like, oh, okay, it's on. Like this is going to be a movie that I should watch because it's almost like a mark of quality. If Jamie Lee Curtis is going to be in a Halloween movie, it's like one of those tips that lets you know, like, okay, this is one that we're expecting that the bar is going to be raised over a previous one. That's all I wanted to say.
No, I would completely agree with that. And, you brought up the other one that would be, if you're going to bring up like final girls that are really memorable and really good characters, Neve Campbell as Sydney would absolutely be the only one that's even in the same stratosphere.
Right.
It's Jamie in this. And then, of course, you have the most memorable character in this movie and really the character that went on to revitalize a genre and add more gas to a fire and more gas to a franchise than could apparently ever burn out. You have the Shape or Michael Myers or Evil, whatever you want to call him. He's got a couple different names in this movie, but he is by far the most, maybe not compelling, but definitely the most like attention getting character in this movie. And there's several different people that are credited with playing Michael Myers throughout this movie. The one that is most often supposedly in costume as Michael Myers is Nick Castle. He's the one who doesn't get all the credit because, again, like I said, it was very much so of whoever was there and could fit in the mask. But I think I've heard like he was like 80% of the time he's Michael Myers in the movie. And for a character that doesn't talk, doesn't do anything other than breathe heavy and stab people, he plays it off really, really well through this whole movie.
Can I ask you a question about Michael Myers?
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that this was never really intended to be a franchise. It was just more of like a one-off. They wrote it like a one-off. It was filmed like a one-off. Do you think that because it was filmed as being a standalone, that they weren't really that shy about showing what Michael Myers looked like under the mask? Later in the movie, his mask gets pulled off. Yeah. And they have a shot of him. It took forever and you see him at the beginning too.
Yeah.
It took forever Freddy, you can't unmask him, but for like Jason they eventually start showing his face more and more. But it felt like it was like this big, it was almost like a luchador, right? It's like, oh, they're going to unmask Jason. We're going to see what he looks like. We're finally going to see what he looks like. I mean, he looks disgusting, but oh, this is what I waited for. But Michael Myers, like right at the beginning when he takes the car, and at the end when his mask is pulled off, you get to see his face. And that was just like, whoa, you get to see his face? That's crazy. Like I actually almost forgot that they did that.
You actually, with Jason, you get to see his face in almost every movie. It's kind of one of the tropes of the franchise is when you get near the end of the movie, they show his face. So it's pretty common with Friday. I think this is just a guess, and I'm kind of reacting. I've never really thought that much about it, to be honest with you, but reacting to the question, if I had to take a guess, I think that it was meant to almost humanize the character, like really up until the last movie. Well, okay, walk that back. For this movie, Michael Myers doesn't have superpowers. Yeah. He's not supposed to be like and again, other movies we'll forget about those for the time being. But with this one, I've always gotten the impression that he is supposed to be a young man who is just hell-bent on killing anything that moves, essentially. And that's the way that this character is written to me, is he is just simply that. Like, there's no motive, there's no like target, there's nothing like that. It's just Michael Myers has come to town, and if you get in his way, he's gonna knife you. That's kind of what it is. So the moment that I think you're talking about, and it's actually Tony, what's his name? Tony
Baloney.
Tony Moran. No, Tony Baloney. Tony Moran is the one that you see in the hallway at the end where his mask comes up and he has to put it back on. So it's actually a different actor in that particular scene. But I always saw it as, I think it's Jamie that gets him at that point. Like, she hits him with the hanger, right?
Yeah.
I always just saw of it as showing that he's still just a man. He's an incredibly like psychotic man, but he's just a guy. So I thought it was supposed to almost humanize the character and kind of give you a little breath of like, okay, this isn't well, none of those other characters were around yet, but this isn't Freddy, or this isn't Jason. Like, he is killable, I guess. But that also kind of discredits the last scene of the movie. So I don't know. I've talked a lot. So what are some of you said you haven't watched this as recently. So coming back on it a little more fresh, what are some of your thoughts on this one?
I think when we talked about Friday the 13th, I remember saying like, I really like the use of the POV, the point of view camera that they would do. You know, they'd always show someone stalking or someone from like behind a tree, and they'd be kind of peering around. I like that again about this, but the other things, some of the little things that I kind of forgot about were, there is so much of this movie, probably half the movie passes before Michael Myers really kills anybody. I mean, there is so much. They do a lot of good jobs, and I kind of want to go over some of them. They do a really good job of showing him just stalking his prey, figuring out when he's going to strike, when he's going to do what he does. I like that he escapes from a mental institution. He steals Dr. Loomis's car, drives away. Oh, he doesn't know how to drive. Well, he looked like he knew how to drive. But he escapes with basically a gown on, like a hospital gown. I love that when I say love, I really mean that I love the way that they explain how he goes from just being some escaped mental patient to being, he's got a blue jumpsuit. Where did he get that from? Oh, he took it from a mechanic that he killed. There was a break-in in a store, and a mask, some knives, rope were missing. They were stolen. Just these few things that were stolen. So they almost like, they build this thing up and they let you can tell they're taking it seriously, because it's not just like, oh, well, one day there was this thing on the ground that he picks up and he puts it on. Like, no, he intentionally went after, going and getting all this stuff. I love that they have him always, when Michael is around, he's always like breathing really heavy. And while I classify this as a horror movie, and I think a lot of people probably do. Most people probably classify this as a horror movie. I really love the elements of suspense where you'll just see, he's not in focus. He's just in the background somewhere, but you'll see the mask and you'll be like, oh shit, he's watching that person right there.
That's so one of the things I wanted to bring up too, but you mentioned the stalking aspect of it and all that. If I were going to put one word to it, it would be tension. And this movie it's almost like just tightening a chain, just one click for every scene until it just keeps going closer and closer and getting more and more tense. But the stalking scenes, like, there's so many spots where if you're watching it, like, you don't even see his body. You just see that like face in the background, whether it's blurred or whether it's in focus. And I would love to see even the new Halloween movies, like, I would love to see some more of that type of thing. Like, you don't have to be Rob Zombie characters to be creepy. This is more creepy than that's ever going to be. And you don't have to turn it into the Trailer Park's titty bar version of a Halloween movie.
Well, that's the thing too, is that with this movie, it's so suspenseful. Like you said, tension, it constantly just ratchets up just a little bit, ratchets it up a little bit. And it seems like in the newer movies, Michael he's just a killing machine. He's going to show up. He's going to kill you. There's a little bit of stalking, but there's no like, now you see me, now you don't. There are so many shots where they do it, where they'll show the camera from the character's view, and Michael will be there, and then they'll look away and they'll do like a double take and he's gone. But while they show you in camera a lot of times that just kind of happens. Like, he's the scene where one of the friends, the girls, gets like locked out of the house or whatever. Jason's just in the window, like a little bit out of the way. He's a little out of focus, a little fuzzy, just kind of chilling back there. And then the camera and the girl turn and they come back to that same angle and he's just gone. It's just like the end, right? I mean, they even carry it through to the end where he gets knocked off the roof. They show him, he's kind of a little twisted up laying there. They turn back to show Dr. Loomis. They come back and he's gone. They keep doing this little hide and seek, this little peekaboo act with Michael. And I just feel like the tension in the 2 might still have a little bit of that tension, but once 4 comes along, it's like, it's just on.
I think with 2, because there was such an effort with 2 to be more like the other slashers that were coming out, that I think it took a lot of that away. But my favorite scene, Spider's back. My favorite scene in as far as the tension and the whole like creeping stuff with it, I think it's Annie, the one that's the babysitting Tommy before she leaves to go get Dick down or whatever. Yeah. There's a scene where she's like, they show like it must be a laundry room. Well, it's a weird scene because there's a washing machine and a refrigerator and a door. And the way that it's shot, like she comes into frame and she's doing something in this room and Tommy comes back inside and she turns around and Tommy's out of the frame or something like that. And she's talking, like she's facing the camera and talking to Tommy. And then she either walks out of frame or something like that. And you just see Michael sitting there staring at her, and they cut back and he's just gone. It's so ominous and again, it's creepy, and it's all played up by something that we haven't touched on yet that I'm sure we will, by this like insanely intense, like instantly iconic score that just amps it up so perfectly through the entire movie.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, but that's amongst the storytelling with this, you have this intense tension angle again. So that's going to lead us into the next spot here, which is the score of this movie, which again, if you don't know the score, I would be kind of shocked, even if you've never seen the movie somehow. I mean, this score has just become like the soundtrack to the season of Halloween for so many people. And it's kind of rightfully earned because it is, well, I think we can both agree that John Carpenter's just a genius to begin with, and we'll probably talk more about that aspect in a little bit here. But the way this score is used, the way it's timed so perfectly to different beats in the movie, the way that it syncs up to even the way that Michael Myers moves, or the way that he stalks, or when he's actually like pursuing someone, anything like that, it is synced up just flawlessly. And it's one of the few like movie scores, I'm not talking like a soundtrack with like, hey, it's the Beatles song written for and inspired by Halloween or something like that.
Hey, now you're an all-star.
It's, yeah, whatever. It's not a soundtrack like that. Like I don't think there's any music that's actually used in it that has lyrics or anything like that. If there is, it's just like background noise or something like that.
Right.
But it is one of the few scores I can think of where people actually will play the score without having anything else to sync up to it, just because it's so well done.
Yeah, and the thing with it, it's not, we're talking about the score if you have not heard it, again, where have you been? But it's so minimalistic, it's so stripped down, it's like 3 instruments, it's like one of the instruments, which is a keyboard,
piano,
it's like 4
synthesizer.
Notes. Yeah. And it's not even, like, as a piece of music on its own, it's not a work of art by any means, and it even the time, like you can tell somebody messed up on the timing. You know, it's not like quarter notes. It's like it's quarter notes, but they're poorly spaced. Like somebody, I still got to hit these 2 keys. It's not even like technically the best song ever. It's just because of the way it's so minimal. The sounds are so like eerie. It's just an eerie sounding melody that plays. That's what makes it so creepy. Like you said, it's the perfect score for this kind of movie, because even though, again, the notes don't hit the beats properly, it's just synchronized. Something about it is just so synchronized with this movie that when you hear the sound or you hear the song, it just makes you instantly think of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it really has kind of transcended the movie and become if you go into any Spirit Halloween, or probably even a Target or a Walmart at this point around Halloween season, there's a good chance you're going to hear this song playing, just because it is that iconic. That leads to the next thing, which would be John Carpenter. So this is the only movie in the franchise that John Carpenter directed. He's got some writing credits on quite a few different things in here, but this is the only Halloween movie that he directed. You know, it's all his brainchild, his creation. That's why I think that has a lot to do with why this movie is so tight and so perfectly paced and so well told from start to finish. I love the little nod to when they're babysitting and watching the TV and the original movie The Thing comes on, because episode coming on this later, but there's some foreshadowing there for sure with where John Carpenter would go in the future. But it's a hard one thing to say with this, because he is, in my opinion, a truly masterful director when he wants to be. Some of his titles, aside from this, like The Fog or They Live, of course, The Thing, are just some really, really great movies. But he really does kind of set himself apart from a lot of the, especially, I think we've touched on this before too, but he really sets himself apart from like the Sean Cunninghams of the world and even the Wes Cravens of the world to an extent with a movie like this.
Yeah, I would say just on that kind of whole I think Wes Craven in this whole kind of realm is really the closest one that you can come to John Carpenter.
I'd agree with that.
Sean Cunningham's just kind of like, I think he's just kind of an also ran, but I think if you had to pick between the three big franchises, you're going to say that, and John Carpenter only directing this one it's a big deal. He adds his, I think a lot of the kind of psychological suspense, again, tension, the peekaboo aspect, a lot of things I think in this movie that were not carried forward into the other movies can be credited directly. I mean, he wrote it, but I think his direction left its mark on this franchise with this movie. He was the perfect person to launch this whole ship. And it makes me think like what could have been if he continued to direct these, like what impact these could have made.
I think it also speaks to what he chose not to do with this movie. Even comparing it to like a Friday the 13th that came out just 2 years after this. This movie is all about less is more when it comes to a lot of things you really expect from a slasher movie. The kills that are in this movie, with one exception that comes to mind, they're kind of more realistic, like real life type of kills. It's not like the exception would be the guy who gets butcher knifed to the cabinet. Like all of a sudden this butcher knife is like 4 feet long and able to support the weight of a adult male.
Is this the guy with the glasses?
Yeah, the guy who goes down to get a beer and Michael guts him and he sticks to the cabinet. And that's a fun scene because you get to see that that's one of the few moments where you kind of get to see into the character of Michael Myers, that he really is just some psycho. Like there's not reason to it, because he almost like just kind of looks at him like, look at what I just did. That's that's messy. But if you did that in a lot of other slasher movies, as soon as that knife goes in, there's like an explosion of blood coming out, and it's much bigger ordeal when you come back to find the body later, where with this, you come back and find the body, but it's not nearly the like special effects shit show that it could be.
Yeah, it's not like a bloodbath.
Right. But I think that's actually one of the things that really works to this movie's advantage because of, again, the tension that's built up and just getting little snippets of what horrors are coming. It really does, it fucks with your mind. And that's one of the things about this movie that it doesn't now, but when I was a kid, it really freaked me out about this movie, because as a kid, I saw this when I was probably 7 or 8, like something like that the first time. So young and impressionable, probably too young to actually watch this movie, but here we are. And this one freaked me out because unlike a lot of other movies in this genre, I was like, this seems fucking plausible. Like I could, and like I said, I had this guy walking up and down the street with a fake knife pretending to do this. So I was like, this seems a lot more plausible than, say, I don't know,
a guy in your dreams
saw back at that point.
Killing you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that really worked to me for this movie. And like I said, a different director, I don't see having that touch to know when to kind of leave it in second gear before kicking it in, like jumping third and going right into fourth. That's a driving reference for all of you that don't know how to drive a stick shift car.
What's a stick shift?
Exactly. I actually tried to convince my insurance company that I had a anti-theft system in my last truck because I had a stick. They didn't go for it.
Yeah.
So John Carpenter, he's great. He's great in this movie. Do you have anything you want to piggyback on that, or did I kind of, I don't know if I hit it all? Or...
No, I think you did. Yeah, did a good job. Good job.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know. You mentioned you have notes. What am I missing here? What have we are not hit?
That's really it. There was like, just for me watching this again, I watched this last night and I just haven't watched it. I think I have watched this one and 3 the most, just because 3 was, I don't know.
Different.
Yeah, it's just so different. It's just so weird comparatively.
It's not just different for Halloween. It's different for horror movies at that time as a whole.
Yeah.
And this is not a Halloween 3 episode, but I mean, that movie for so long was so polarizing, and I can see, like, hearing stories of people who were around when it came, like, I wouldn't have been able to go to see it in a theater or anything. I don't remember the advertising for it when it came out, but I can see why people would have been pissed off about how that movie played out.
It feels like a bait and switch the first time you see it, because you're expecting it to be a continuation of 2, and it's not. Right. It's an anthology series. It's about Silver Shamrock. It's about actual Halloween and masks that are being marketed, and, like, I don't know, space aliens or some shit, or robots. It's just a really weird movie, but I can appreciate it now a lot more. Right. You know, that was like, I was one of those people that really hated this movie, and it was because 3. We're talking about 3. Taking a slight diversion. Really hated 3 because it didn't have Michael Myers, and it was probably like, I'm gonna be honest, it was probably one of the first horror movies that I was like able to pick out and say, I want to rent this one. You know, it's probably like 11, 10, something like that. And my friend was like, oh, 3 sucks, doesn't have Michael Myers. I'm like, whatever. I want to, for whatever reason, against my better judgment, pick that one up from the video store, watched it, and was like, this does suck. It doesn't have Michael Myers, but it had a couple scenes that I was turning my head from, I'll tell you that much. But going back and watching it as an adult, it was like, oh, this is actually a pretty good movie. Tom Wilkinson does a great job. I mean, he's but that's Halloween 3. We're talking about Halloween here, so back on track. But yeah, I hadn't seen this in so long. I didn't remember that this was so tense. Like, it really ratcheted up that tension, like we mentioned earlier. It starts so kind of just, I mean, it starts with Michael as a child killing his sister, and that's why he gets put in this mental institution, but that's why he gets institutionalized. But you don't realize, when you think of these movies, you just think, oh, it's a slasher. You know, it's Halloween. It's the start of this franchise, and it's going to be just this nonstop, just kill fest. And it's not. It's really, and a lot of these movies started like that. The Friday the 13th we talked about. It has a pretty slow go, and this is no exception. It starts off slow, but very, like, intentional. You can tell there's an intention. It's not just going to fly off the rails. Like you said, Michael is just a dude. He's not like some superhuman, some superhero, barring a few things that happen. And you're just constantly on the edge of your seat. You're on pins and needles. Like, when is this thing going to happen? Because there's so many scenes where Michael is just so close to his prey. He just kind of leaves them, and he just watches them, watches their movement, watches the routine, and then goes in when it feels right to him, which is weird to say, but it just shows so much restraint that it makes it a better movie. You know, there's the headstone scene where the headstone disappears, and the groundskeeper at the funeral takes Dr. Loomis, and they notice the headstone's gone. Like, oh, these damn kids, always near Halloween. Why do they have to disrespect, blah, 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 blah. And the
like how he says, I don't understand why you took the headstone, but you didn't take the body.
Yeah. So, and then the headstone shows up later. You know, it shows up in a bed above another female victim. And it's like, oh, is this Judith? Is that Michael's sister's name, I think? Yeah. Here lies Judith Myers, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's fucked up. So just like I said with the part about, you find out how he has the jumpsuit, how he has the mask, how he has his equipment, his gear, so to speak. The headstone it's not just a MacGuffin. It's like the headstone gets taken away, but it shows up later. Things are written in a way that it's going to pay off, you know, in some way. It might not be this huge payoff. It might just be some minor thing that happens, but it pays off. Like, checks that are written at the beginning are paid off at the end. You'll have to remind me.
The Ben Tramer line is actually paid off in the second movie.
That's the girl, the boy that she likes.
Yeah.
I had to think about who
Ben
that was.
Tramer. He's got a really bright future, and he is one of the most ridiculous kills that is not done by Michael Myers, like almost like 2 minutes into the second movie.
Is that getting hit by the car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting hit by the car into the instant explosion because he was dressed up like
Michael
whatever.
Myers.
So,
Because, those
Right.
masks were just circulating all of a sudden. Well, I guess it was, though. Like I said,
well, yeah.
pick it up from the store. That's what, at the time, that's like mind blown. Like, I'm thinking of it because when that happens,
that's what Ben Tramer will do to you. Is he'll blow your mind.
So why the hell is this guy walking around with a Michael Myers mask? That's so stupid. Well, now I think about it. The reason he has it is because it's just in a local store, like in the downtown. So anybody could have it. So that's what makes that even more fucked up. So they paid it off. They paid it forward. They paid it off.
Right. Do you have any other little like nugget scenes that you want to kind of bring up, or any like high points, low points, anything like that?
No, I think I've exhausted my notes. I'm even trying to think of things that are just kind of wrong or weird, but I can't really think of anything. And I just watched this yesterday.
It's okay. Yeah, that Halloween in you, so you can be forgetful.
Mind is the first thing to go. That's what they say.
It is a gateway. So I really like Dr. Loomis fucking with the kids when he's at the Myers house, when he's hiding in the bushes, like threatening them and stuff, and chasing them away. That is the personification of 1970s mental health right there. It is. That's a good spot. That's a great little scene. The use, I forget which girl was saying, it's not Lori, it's either Annie or the other chick. Her use of the word totally in the first 5 minutes when they're walking home from school, she says it so many times and she puts so much emphasis on the word totally that I've actually made a GIF out of it that I send to my wife 4 times a week just to annoy her because it's so overused. But it's one of the few writing points in the movie where it's got to be some kind of joke that John Carpenter thought was funny, because I don't know how else it got into the movie this many times in the first. And again, it's before they even get to. I think it might even be before Michael breaks out. So it's really early in the movie. And then you have the ending so I guess we should talk about the ending a little bit because we haven't tapped on that. So this movie ends kind of breaking the myth of what we just said, where Michael is just a guy in this. After he gets stabbed in the eye, like we mentioned, puts his mask back on, Loomis shows up with his 6-shooter and basically unloads on him. He never shoots him in the head, which I don't know why. If you're going to unload 6 shots into a guy, you would think you would put one of them in the head.
Or try. Yeah.
Shoots him 6 times, sends him out a window, falls down. And in movie time, we're talking 2 seconds, so it can't be that long. Just looks down there and his body gets up and wanders away to start Halloween 2. Now, him getting up and wandering away was not part, the Halloween 2 aspect of it was not part of why that was in there. I think it was supposed to be just kind of for lack of better wording, a mindfuck ending or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's the only point in the movie where you're Psycho, or I don't know. You hear stories about people with all kinds of adrenaline going where they do all kinds of crazy shit. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a story of some guy getting shot 6 times and still getting up and going on to be crazy still. But
it didn't cure him.
No, it definitely didn't cure him. It didn't slow him down all that much either, if you know what happens after this. But it's the only point in the movie where you're okay, well, maybe, and again, this is probably the intention, where you're well, maybe he is some kind of demon or whatever. It's a little weird because it almost feels out of place compared to the rest of the movie, but it also kind of works at the same time.
Yeah, it's from that cult.
Yeah, but that's not in this timeline. That's a different timeline. So,
oh, damn it.
Yeah, we have a long way to go to get the Thorn cult. That doesn't even start till part 4. So, sorry, Cult of Thorn. I said it wrong.
You better watch out. Those
Do you want
cult
to put
members are going to come after us.
They might. That's fine, though. I can think of worse cults to join. So, do you want to put your hot dog rating on this?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this the whole time we had been talking about it, especially at the beginning. You showed your hand. You told us you're going to give it a 10 out of 10. I would probably personally give this, it's tough. I'm wavering between 8.5 to 9 because it's not a 10 for me. But it's really good. It's one of those movies where I feel like the time away from it did it a lot of good. It was one that it really made me appreciate, especially seeing the other movies that we've been watching, really appreciate that it's not just a splatter fest. It takes its time to get there. So I guess I'm going to finish. I'm going to be decisive. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I think this is the classic horror slasher movie that you should watch. It should be in your rotation if slasher movies are your thing, or even if they're not, or you're not really, you don't have a real good entryway to slashers, I think that this is a really good one to start with because it's not overly gory. It's not overly killy. I mean, people get killed, obviously, but it relies a little bit more on the tension aspect, the suspense aspect, than the killing and the blood and the gore aspect of it. So it's kind of, it's good in that respect. I mean, I wouldn't show it to my 12-year-old, but I think like, it's almost like this could be PG-13. I don't know if the language is even...
By today's standards, it might be.
Yeah, I mean, then it was a hard R, I'm sure. But these days, it's something that feels like it could be a PG-13. And I'm sure kids have seen a lot worse on cable TV.
Probably. So yeah, like we mentioned, I definitely, for me, this is a 10 hot dogs out of 11 stabby pumpkins. This movie it's not perfect, but it is iconic. And it's one of the few movies that gets called iconic that I really think earned the moniker of being iconic. The only other movie we really talked about this kind of esteem with it would be Scream. And we both said that would be a good entry point for getting into horror movies too. And I would absolutely agree with that on this one. It's not so over the top, like even really any other entry into this franchise. Like it's not so over the top where you could watch it and think, okay, but that's kind of fucking stupid because X, Y, and Z. I mean, this is not only competently made, this is a masterfully made movie that is really achieved something that very few other horror movies have kind of gotten to. So, and yeah, it's one that I put in every October. I have fun with it every October. I've never gotten tired of it. Some years I watch it more than others. Sometimes things just end up on your TV and you're like, well, I'm not going to change that. So, but it is, like I said, it's a classic and it deserves, in my opinion, it's a classic that deserves every bit of praise that comes its way. I have no real strong argument that I could try to knock it down. Any imperfection in it is either something that you can see and say, well, that's limitations of 1978, or for all I know, that was something that was purposely in there because it made John Carpenter go, huh. So whatever the case may be. But yeah, this one is up there for me. Anything you want to add on this one before we start wrapping?
No, we were going to go short on this. We ended up going pretty much what we usually do.
Yeah, that's short enough. Yeah, we are pretty close to that. Okay. Well, in that case, get your ass out there. Listen to this while your kids are trick-or-treating so you don't have to listen to their nonsense. Or listen to it beforehand and make them hear it too so they can learn about the magic of Michael Myers. You know, I'm full of bad advice right now. Don't listen to me. Just listen to the show. Anyway, follow us on all the socials. We're at Dewey Pod Monster. You can always check our site at anchor.fm/Dewey Pod Monster. You can leave us messages. We can use that in future episodes, or you can just leave us messages and not use it in an episode. Whatever. We would appreciate the feedback. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Sean, you have things to plug. Why don't you go ahead and plug those?
You can find me on the internet at youtube.drafttherapy.com. It'll take you directly to my YouTube channel, which is Draft Therapy. Take a little bit of a hiatus. By the time you hear this, I'll be dead. No, I'll probably have had some kind of major surgery. So recovering from that, wish me well. And yeah, you can find me on all the socials at Draft Therapy.
All right. Well, in the meantime, we'll go back to Halloween and other goofy things going forward, but have yourself a good Halloween, and we will be back soon with our normal release schedule. Cheers.
Bullshit.